All right. We're in First Kings chapter 3. And the lesson that we're going to learn tonight is that God gave Solomon everything necessary for success. Literally everything. From wisdom to resources, he had it all. And but even in that, we're going to see there's one thing that God gave so much to Solomon, but you know what he did not take away from Solomon? His responsibility to obey. We're going to see he gave him everything and then said, but if you obey me, this is what else I'll do. What's that mean? It means he's not going to make Solomon do anything. He's provided the opportunity, and Solomon still has free will. God can do a lot for you and me, but we keep free will. We can be thankful for a while and then grow accustomed to it, think it's owed to us, and forget who gave it to us, and start to choose things selfishly. We can go from one thing to another. We can either grow spiritually or we can regress spiritually. And we're going to see a little bit of that in both of Solomon. What we will see are at the beginning of this, chapter 3 starts, Solomon just became king, and this is going to begin to describe Solomon's kingship. And there's a hint in this that it's not just starting the next story, but it's more like a prologue that's telling us, giving us the overview, then it's going to back up and tell us the story. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. Verse 1, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. All right, so how much got done in that verse? Quite a bit. Now, if you look over at chapter 6, what happens in chapter 6? He's going to build the temple. Well, I thought he just built it in verse 1. No, he didn't build it in 1. All of this, it's not written as it happens. It's collected information. So when they're writing chapter 3, chapter 6 has already happened in real life. So they know, David did this, and it took it all the way up to here. But now we're going to back up here and tell you the story. That's easy to understand, right? So again, a lot of things seem cyclical in the Hebrew language, or it seems not out of context, but out of chronology, out of order. And a lot of times it's not in chronological order, but in pieces it's not in chronological order. But when you step back and see the whole thing, the order, the chronology is explained at some point. And so this is kind of an introduction into the kingship of Solomon. Now, when we read verse 1, we read, these events happened. But to the Jewish mindset, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. What do you think a Jew might see, a Jew of that time might hear or read in that statement? What are some thoughts that would go through their head? Yeah, is he trying to go back to where Moses came from? Like, what's happening here? Yeah, is he supposed to be doing this? Foreign wives. So where we read events, they read, they're giving us a hint to the nature that we're going to learn about Solomon as we read. So they're not looking for events, they're looking for clues of what to look for as you continue to read. And so it'd be good for us to view these verses the same way. Look and see what it says. It's all factual data, but they're telling us some things to look for as we continue to go through the book. The author, we're going to see here in a moment, is very fair to Solomon. He points to some problems, but then still gives some positive things about Solomon. We're going to see his political marriages, his connection to Egypt, but then we're going to see his genuine love for God. But even though he has genuine love for God, we're going to see areas just like this one. A lot of this, starting in verse 1, is we're going to see areas of disobedience or incomplete obedience. He will obey God to a certain point, but does he fully obey? We have a tendency to obey part of God's command and feel like, but at least I did part of it. That's better than I was. When God's saying, I gave you this command because I want you to do how much of it? All of it. And so we're going to see what happens when we have incomplete obedience. He will be described as walking with the Lord as his father David did. But then there will be exceptions, except in this area. So he's not just trying to bash on Solomon, and he's certainly not trying to build him up when he doesn't deserve it. It is a fair assessment of the good and bad of Solomon. That is not normal writing for kings of that era. And it is, again, why we trust these books as scripture truth, because they're not after man's agenda, they are after God's agenda. So let's keep reading, starting in verse 2. Yes, please do. Mm-hmm. When he marries her. Yeah. And Gezer is at the crossroads of the north-south road and the east-west road. And Solomon knows that he's got to build a temple. Mm-hmm. And even though David has supplied a lot of the materials, he's going to need free access to those trade routes to get the materials that he needs. Yeah. So this is a common sense. Yes. And that's a good point. It's not that David just said, wow, that girl, Solomon, thank you. It's not that Solomon said, hey, that girl over there is really pretty, and we just happened to fall in love on this little vacation when I was visiting Egypt, and, no. Very political move, gaining territory, and as Kathy was saying, it's trade routes. It's going to be important when it comes time to build the temple and all this other stuff that's going on. Are there good earthly excuses for Solomon to do what he did? Yeah. What's the problem? They're earthly excuses. God said don't. We can rationalize things that may not be wrong for somebody else, but God said, don't you do it. And so it's look, there's a lot more to than what meets the eye when it comes to these. But let's go on to verse 2. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. And Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. It's a big word. And it's like, man, he's following David's heart and love for the Lord, except, which means not fully. And so I began to do a little digging into it. What is the problem that David's doing? Solomon. What is the problem? I might do that several times. Just correct me every time. Eventually, I'll know who we're talking about.
When we worship, God wants our full devotion to Him.
He does.
And Solomon, even though you see some things he was doing good, he wasn't giving that full devotion.
Yeah, it wasn't. But let's talk about it specifically for a moment. What was he doing wrong? Give me specifics. It tells us in here, except he was doing what? Offering the sacrifices on the high places. Well, where's he supposed to do it? Temple. What's the problem with doing it at the temple? It's not built yet. And so as I started digging into this to try to understand it a little bit, we're even going to see in a moment that Gibeon is one of the high places that he goes to worship. And while he's there, God comes and speaks to him. And you would think, based on what we just read, if God comes and talks to Solomon while he's worshiping at a high place and not at the tabernacle, what would you expect God to say? Yeah, but what's God say is, I'm going to offer you one thing, name it whatever you want. That's the conversation that's going to come up. So we're going to look into that just a little bit about these high places and try to get a balanced view and then try to understand what's going on. But in these verses, some topics are laid out here that will further develop later in the book. If you know the history of Israel that happens in 1st and 2nd Kings, you're already seeing hints of, he's forming an alliance with Egypt. That's going to become problems. He's marrying foreign wives. That's going to be a problem. The worship on the high places. That's going to be a problem. Like if you know the stuff, these are all coming up later. Solomon's wife is living in Jerusalem now. That's where he went and got her, and she stays there until the temple is complete. That's going to be something else to watch, which means she's there the whole time. Did I read that part yet? Where it mentions... Yeah, back in verse 1, brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. So how long is this new wife going to stay there? For a while. And then he's going to move her to the palace a little further away from the temple, and a few things are going on. But here's what I want us to notice is... Solomon now builds the temple, but he's still going to be worshiping at the high. He's going to be building the temple, but still worshiping at the high places. And then we're going to see those high places turn into something else as we get through several chapters. Gibeon was one of the most important high places. Notice what it says in verse 4. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. So it almost seems here like it was being allowed, right? And it actually was, because God's going to speak here, and we're going to see some shifts in this topic of the high places and this topic of Solomon's wife. These are all, I know it sounds like I'm going back and forth and a little confusing. Let me tell you why. It's laying it out that way. It's giving us some topics, then it's going to back up and talk about these things. We're going to see a shift in Solomon's commitment to holiness. And this is where you'll start to see some of this picture take place. Look at 2 Chronicles. So 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. I want you to go to 2 Chronicles chapter 8. What's that? Of 2nd Chronicles? Nah, good. So they had moved the tabernacle to Gibeon. Okay, so that's why it was the most important place. So can you see? My wife and my daughter, whenever they do that when we talk about this stuff at home too. You two behave over there. They're trying to. I know what they're doing. I know. All right. So the reason, what would be your argument right now of why Solomon worships at the high places? Huh? Temple hadn't been built. Where's the tabernacle? On the high place at Gibeon. So he goes to Gibeon. You could say he's going to the tabernacle, but he's also going to a high place. Just hold on to all these facts for a minute. Look at 2 Chronicles 8, verse 11. Because it is going to take some time to build the temple, and I think that's part of the problem. David had Solomon all ready to build that thing, and I think it's taken him a little longer than he should. But anyway, verse 11, Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter up from the city of David to the palace that he had built for her. You see how that goes along with verse 1 that we read? He kept her there until he built the palace. All right, this is, the follow-up of that story. And he said, my wife must not live in the palace of David, king of Israel. So that's where they were at. They've been living in David's palace. David's gone. They're living in that palace. You shouldn't be there anymore. We'll put her in her own palace. And why? Because the place the ark of the Lord has entered, the places the ark of the Lord has entered are holy. She can't go there because these are holy places. My wife can't go there because these are holy places. Y'all see a problem with that? The Bible never really comes right out and describes Pharaoh's daughter and her spiritual nature, so I don't want to read more into it than what's there. But it sure seems to me that by statements like that and where he puts her and the fact that we don't hear anything about her in a good light tells me that it was a political union, but she never left her Egyptian gods. And we will see that Egyptian gods become a real problem for Israel down the road. What better place to come from than the queen, So, again, that we don't find that out until 2 Chronicles, but back in 1 Chronicles, it's laying this part of the story out for us. I mean, in 1 Kings, it's laying out that part of the story for us. Even though the ark had been moved from there and into the temple, wherever the ark had gone, Solomon considered holy and sanctified, and because the ark had rested there, he said, I want to keep this place holy. Can you see his attitude towards holiness early on? So the writer is letting us know that, hey, his wife and the people reading this would have known, oh yeah, that's the one he moved out of there. because he was keeping the place holy. That would be in favor of Solomon. It's a positive thing about Solomon. Except we're going to see holiness change view in Solomon's life. So all these other things, including the holiness, we're going to see is a theme that we need to watch as we read through the Kings. Early in his reign, Solomon was careful to protect the holiness of the places associated with God's presence. 1 Kings, go forward a little bit to chapter 11. And look at verse 7. It's not that far ahead of where we're at right now. Verse 7, on a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. So what happens between I'm protecting the holiness of the city of David to I'm building worship centers on the high places? What used to be on the high places? Places they could worship God. And he turns them into worship centers of foreign gods. And it doesn't take long, does it? So you can see how these topics are coming up. But what happens in the life of Solomon between this time that he wants to protect the holiness of the city and he builds all these worship centers to foreign gods for his foreign wives? What happens in between there is he has this meeting with God on the high places, and we're going to look at it this evening, that conversation, and God says, I'll give you anything you want. Ask me for one thing. And Solomon's going to say, I want wisdom. You can't help but get to chapter 11 and say, whatever happened to his wisdom? We're going to talk about that. I think it'll make some sense by the time we're done. But notice the progression. First we have Egypt, a relationship with Egypt, Pharaoh's daughter, then the high places. Those three things, Egypt, Pharaoh's daughter, and the high places, those three things make you wonder where the author is going with this. If the author starts with an introduction to where, he's got ties with Egypt, he's marrying foreign wives and Pharaoh's daughter, and he still worships at the high places, which is a real concern if the high places change from just the Lord. Like, where's the author going with this? You're expecting him to, be hitting David pretty hard. Solomon. I've been on David for, 9 months? Through 1st and 2nd Samuel, and that took us forever. And so just keep correcting me. I will eventually remember to say his name. Here's what he's doing. He's listing these problem areas every reader would have known when they started to read chapter 3, what the author is talking about. And so with this problem, and then this problem, and then this problem, what would you expect to come up? Thematically, you would not expect God's grace and mercy and special gift coming as the very next story. See, that is done intentionally. It is to say, yeah, look, I'm not forgetting where it goes. I know where it goes. Here's where it began. We're going to see these problems. But let's just step back for a minute. Even though Solomon was doing that, let's not forget what God did. Even though Solomon was making some good choices, and we know he's going to make some bad choices. A lot of this is going to go to his head. A lot of things are going to happen. The wives are going to put pressure on him. He's going to cave because he still has free will. I get all that. But in the middle of that, where is God? You see, I think it's good to look at this chapter less on what do we learn about Solomon and more of what do we learn about God. And if we do it, if we go from that approach, we will see things that you might often miss if you're just looking to try to figure out if Solomon's doing right or wrong. We're so judgmental when we read, is he doing right or wrong? Is he doing right or wrong? And it's okay to look for those things, but let's step back and say, but why is this story here for us? What is God teaching us? Look at verse 5 now. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. How many of you would like God to offer that to you? That'd be a scary, I'd have to really think about, because if he asked me that right now, the rapture would happen. Then come on back. Verse 6, Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Speaking of himself in the third person. Now, Lord, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child, about 20 years old, so I don't think he's speaking as much in age as he is in experience. He's 20 years old, and he's got to lead one of the most important nations ever, build a temple, build walls, and judge people administratively. You think that he'd be a little overwhelmed? He says, I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people. You have chosen a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Wow. That's already packed with so much wisdom. It is a beautiful, humble recognition. What are some of the things that you see there that show the attitude of Solomon, that he's got the right attitude, he's recognizing some right things? What, from his comments, do we know he understood? Yeah, he's a steward king. Those people belong to God, not to him. What else? He's teachable. My authority here as king is not because I'm David's son, it's because you put me here. In fact, in a normal world, I had two older brothers that should have had it. And so it's not because I fought for it and won it. You gave this to me. It's a great observation. We should never forget what we have has come from God. What else? He's got a lot of people he needs to answer for and to help them, so he's got to care for the people. Like there's too many people to help, and I've got to administrate. I got to judge between them. They're gonna come to the court and say, this person did this and this person did this, and I've got to be the judge between them. Like, how do I do that? He recognizes that. Yes, he recognizes his own weaknesses in doing this. His inexperience, his lack of knowledge. He's recognizing his own weaknesses. How about this? His recognition of the past. That he said, the reason you treated my dad the way you did is because of his faithfulness to you. That takes some recognizing several different things, does it not? He recognizes who God is, why God did it. his own father's faithfulness, even though, I can say this correctly, did David make any mistakes? Yeah. But Solomon still recognized that his father David truly had a heart for the Lord and wanted to follow him. And he recognizes God's authority. He also calls David the servant of the Lord, but then he turns around and calls himself the servant of the Lord. Your servant is king in recognition that God made Solomon king. Solomon knows he's not ready. He's inexperienced. He lacks the knowledge. The job is overwhelming. And so in verse 9, what does he ask for? So give your servant a discerning heart. That's wisdom. To govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. Does God give Solomon the ability to distinguish in his mind between right and wrong? Yes. Does that mean he will always do what he knows to be right? That is correct. There's a difference between, I don't want to get ahead of myself because it's coming, I'm going to show this a little bit more, but the idea, there's a difference between wisdom and obedience. Yes, you sure can, Jimmy.
What I'm gathering here, and I kind of looked over 2 Chronicles, it was his heart's desire to have the wisdom of the discerning. Now, a lot of people nowadays guess if the Lord come to you and said, what do you want? What do you want? Well, I want wealth. I want to live forever. But his heart's desire was to have wisdom, to discern.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to rule his people. He wanted to rule his people in a way that God wanted him to.
Absolutely, he did. And we're about to see that Jimmy's observation of Solomon is God's observation of Solomon. And just watch how this plays out. This is just so good. This, to me, is the key principle of the whole section, is verses 10 to 14. This, to me, I love this. These 4 verses or 5 verses could preach all day long. Here we go. Verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this and not for. Let me just stop right there. He didn't just say, all right, I like your answer. That's a good one. He says, let me tell you some things others would have asked for, but you didn't. And God's going to bring those up. Now watch what some of them are. Since you asked for this and did not ask for a long life or wealth for yourself, nor have even asked for the death of your enemies, for protection, but for discernment in administering justice. Look, stop right there. Wow. God says, I would have given you anything, but what you asked for is, and it's not just, we just think wisdom as in general wisdom. And I think God gave him that, but he's asking for a specific type of wisdom. To know how to rule and judge and discern the people. If you understand the flow of this passage, of this conversation between Solomon and God, Solomon says, I know you gave this job to my father, and he had a heart that pursued you, so you blessed. Now you have given the same throne to me. And so I accept the responsibility that you have given me to lead the people. Let me put this in really simple terms. God chose a ministry for Solomon. It was judging the people. Solomon said, in order for me to do what you've asked me to do, I'm going to need your strength to do it. Okay? Y'all see that? The job is bigger than him, but he was willing to do it because God called him to it. This should be really simple for you to understand how this fits the principle in our own lives. If you're serving the Lord in a ministry that you can see how you do it in your own strength, you're not thinking big enough. God has called us to do things, to serve one another, to serve the kids of this church beyond our ability. To say, God, wow, the only way I'm going to be able to pull this off is if you, and then you ask for things that help you fulfill what God has called you to do. If that becomes the focus of your prayer life, these other things, like what percentage of the average Christian, I'm not going to ask you to be personal, it'll be too painful, but of the average Christian, let's say in America in 2026, percentage of their prayers are asking for strength to do what God has called them to do versus, wealth, health, protection, the things he didn't ask for. He didn't ask for health. He didn't long life. He didn't ask for wealth. He didn't ask for protection from the enemies. What percentage of Christian prayers center around their health, their wealth, or their protection? 90, 89. If 80%, I would be shocked if it's that low of a percentage. Listen to people's prayer. How often do they say, Lord, and I know you want me to do this, and I don't know how to do it. I'm going to need your strength. Let me give you another verse. I'm going to start it off, and you'll see so quickly how this fits. Set your attention on your affection on things above, not on things of the earth. It doesn't say set your attention or your affection on things above and put it, at least tweak it above the things of the earth. This is not on things of the earth. And if you do that, what will be added to you? Watch what God does. Solomon doesn't ask for certain things. By not asking, what happens? Verse 12. Verse 10 and 11, God said to him, because you did not ask for these things, and you asked for the right thing. Verse 12, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Whoa. Look, he didn't just say, yeah, you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give it to you. It's because he focused on the right thing far beyond the earthly things. God said, I'm not just going to give you wisdom. Because you came with the right direction, I'm going to give you so much wisdom, there will never, ever, in all of human history, be somebody as wise as you. Whew. I think if he'd have said, well, can I ask for two things? Wisdom and protect me from my enemies, and while you're at it, can I have some stuff and live long? It wouldn't have worked. It was the fact that he put the heavenly stuff so far ahead of the earthly stuff, he didn't even consider the earthly stuff, that God comes in and watch this. Verse 13, moreover, like not only am I going to give you what you want, I love the word moreover. It's over, but it's not just over, it's moreover. And more and more and more over. It is now, isn't it? It's like gooder. Betterer. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for. How beautiful is that? I'm going to give you what you didn't ask for. Why? Both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. I may raise up bigger kings later. I've got some, look, why? Give me one good reason that God could not promise him no king would ever be greater than Solomon. Because Jesus is coming. So he says, rather than explain all that, he says, Solomon, during your life, there will be no earthly king greater than you. What position does that put him in on the earth? He owned it, man. He's in a good spot. And why did God do that? Because he had the right heart. Now watch this though. In verse 14. And if, you should circle that if. Because he just went from promising all kinds of things to Solomon. But he says, but if. So there's a guarantee that God's going to answer his promises. There's a guarantee that God's going to give him wisdom. There's a guarantee that God's going to give him health and wealth and honor. But what's not guaranteed? Solomon's obedience. And what would come from that is long life. That's what's coming. He said, if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands, as David your father did, I will give you long life. I'll give you the wealth. I'm going to give you the honor. But if you want to live a long time, one of the things you didn't ask for that you could have, I'll even grant that to you. On one condition. Love me as your father David did. Then Solomon awoke and realized he had been in a dream. It was a dream that was a vision from God. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast to all of his court. Now I've got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to read the rest of this chapter because I want to finish chapter 3 today. Because it fits with what we're just describing. Because we have this tendency to think he just had wisdom in all spiritual matters as well. But the example of the kind of wisdom that he was given was in administering justice to the people, which is what he specifically asked for. I mean, it could have been, and then, somebody came in and tempted him with a false god, and he recognized it and said, oh, no. We will only serve the one true living God. But that's not the area of wisdom he asked for. This is the area, and so it gives us this illustration. Now, 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, pardon me, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone there, and we were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. Stop right there. Does that not show you the problem of the people already? They're messed up. And he's got to try to judge between them. It's like you just want to knock them inside of the head and say, well, if you do things biblically. But that wasn't even a part of the conversation. Let's go on. Verse 19. During the night, this woman's son died because she laid on him. She rolled over on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours. But the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. Oh, my goodness. You need Judge Judy or something like that. The king said, this one says my son is alive and your son is dead. Well, that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive. All right, so, yeah, he's just restating the facts of the case. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king. And he gave an order, cut the living child in two, give half to one, half to the other. That'll fix it. Oh, my goodness. And here's the thing. You almost wonder, like how they, I don't know, Lisa. You get the feet, I get the head. You know, when I hear this story, I almost think, part of me says, but that wouldn't be believable. A king wouldn't do that. They had to know. But kings had a lot of power. And you didn't want to make the king angry. And these two bickering women in front of him, for him to silence them, I'm just going to shut them up right here. And who wants his kid growing up in either one in this house? Kid's better off in glory. Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, you know the rest of the story. But I know what he was thinking. But I wonder what they were thinking. You know, because they didn't know he's pulling. It's like, how would it have been believable to them? I think it would have been believable to the women that he meant it because they recognized the fuss they were making in front of the king. Yeah, they're waiting to figure out how he's going to do this stuff. So he then gave the order, cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him. And the other said, well, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two. Oops. She gave herself away, didn't she? Then the king gave his ruling, give the living baby to the first woman, do not kill him, she is the mother. And when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. So he's the wisest man that ever lived, but he's the wisest judge to administer that ever lived. Does that make sense? All right, it's 3 minutes after. That's not bad. Any other comments, questions, Jimmy?
Kind of reminds me of Moses when he had to do all of that.
Yes.
In Leviticus back there.
Yeah, when Jethro, his father-in-law, comes to him and says, you're trying to do this all by yourself, and that's after 40 years of growing up in Pharaoh's palace and then 40 years in the wilderness. He was 80 years old when he had the wisdom to start that, and he's doing that with all of Israel. Now you got a 20-year-old kid saying, I got to do what Moses did? Hannah? Yeah, that's a good point. The child killing God. There's a disrespect for children that was, yeah, that'll come up later. Anything else? Y'all good? All right, dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for giving us the lessons from both David and Solomon and learning the principles that we can read about, how important it is for us to be fully obedient to you, not partially, to ask for wisdom, to set our affection on things above first, that you can see our needs, you can see our desires, but when we put first the things that are most important, you reward us with those other things we could have asked for. And we thank you for that. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.